Welcome to Marlow Hill. This is our property which is in Central Hawke's Bay, not far from Takapau. We have 350 hectares or 950 acres in the old language, and out of that 350 hectares there's a little bit over 30 hectares is in forestry, about 33 or 34 if I count my nut tree blocks as well. Of that forestry, mostly it's Pinus radiata, and then there are other species as well. I'm leaning against a eucalyptus regnans here, so I've got quite a few of the mountain ash planted. There's also Macrocarpa lusitanica, acacia melanoxyn, and probably 2 or 3 hectares in nut trees as well, chestnuts, walnuts, some pecans and hazelnuts and almonds. So quite a diverse range of planting. I've always enjoyed trees, and probably the advantage was it was a tax deductible hobby some 20-25 years ago. But now we're starting to reap the benefits of those trees and really enjoy being able to walk amongst the trees and have them being part of the farm. It just adds a lot more diversity and beauty to the property, and as we'll talk about, there's some other intangible benefits. So what we've done is we've planted our steeper, less productive country out into trees, various alternative species as well as the Pinus radiata, and it's just hopefully a wiser land use than trying to put fertiliser on it and continue to grow stock here. The fertiliser that was going on this type of country from the plains is now going on to the better country where the stock spend more of their time or most of their time, and that's now growing more grass, and so obviously we're not putting fertiliser in here. It's just a better allocation of resources. So those resources, in this case fertiliser, is going on to the better country, which is growing more grass, and that seems, over the 20 to 30 years, seems to be offsetting the loss of some 13-14% of our farm into forestry. Of course it's not lost, because it's still of use in terms of the stock. Shearing, when I shear, if the weather cuts up rough, I have these areas to be able to put shorn sheep in and be fairly certain that they'll be safe and well and happy. It's also a bit of a rough food bank, or a rough hay barn. At times when we do get into a bit of a feed pinch, I go, oh yes, there's 20 or 30 hectares of forestry up in the hills, so I'll put the stock through there. Just in the last 6 months we've managed to harvest our first trees. It was all very exciting. There was 2.5 hectares of Pinus radiata. I hadn't planted either, well actually I had planted one of those blocks when I was a teenager from my father, and the other one was on a property that I bought. The trees had been planted 2 or 3 years, so I'd been involved in the low, medium and high pruning, and was pretty excited to see my first truckloads of logs going out. It was in March, April of 2011, which was a little bit of a peak in the market, and I guess a good message would be to manage your expectations. I was thinking that these were great big prune butt logs and a bit rougher above that, but I was still thinking I might have made $25,000 a hectare. In fact, it ended up on the 2.5 hectares at about $16,000 a hectare net. But anyway, it was a nice little bit of income, the start of our forestry income. There's now a gap of 10 years, and then the other trees will come online. So that, of course, is the major benefit, I guess, when you're planting forestry, is that you are hoping or expecting a return, if it's radiata, in 30 years, alternative species 35 or 40 years time, and can put that capital or that money made from the forestry to good use, whether it's retirement planning or succession planning. In this case we used the money we made to contribute to building a new wool shed. When the trees are harvested and you have these lumps of capital, hopefully, you can put them to good use. It might be debt retirement. In our case it's part of our retirement planning and succession planning for our 3 sons. As I say, we have roughly 30 hectares of trees in the hills, and even at a conservative $10,000 a hectare would be $300,000 or $400,000. I would hope for more than that, but that will contribute to a retirement house or a bit of our retirement. By the time I turn 65 or 70, whenever the superannuation age is at that time, there may not be any superannuation, so this will be part of our retirement income or living or capital to build a retirement house. Might also help in terms of our succession. If we have a son who is a farmer and 2 are not, we might be able to spread the capital a little bit more fairly or evenly across the 3 sons, but those are decisions for another 10 or 15 years time. Some 13% of our total property is planted in production forestry, but because it's mostly on the marginal land that you can see behind me, up in the hills, maybe about 50% of the hills have trees on them. And And one thing you just need to be mindful and consider is the impact on the environment, the visual impact. I've done a few things that I probably would have done differently now in hindsight, and particularly once the trees get to 20-25 years of age it becomes quite obvious. Straight lines across the landscape, trying not to go up over the tops of hills, and be mindful of the species you're using, although most of the time we get pushed towards, on this sort of country and in this climate, pushed towards Pinus radiata. It's not the prettiest of species, but it's ubiquitous for a reason, and it does tend to grow in most places. So you just give some consideration to, when you are planting, to what effect it might have on the landscape, and be mindful of other observers and neighbours. If you are considering planting production forestry and indeed shelter belts and amenity trees, the best thing you can do is talk to others who've already done it and try and avoid some of the mistakes that they've done. There's no point reinventing the wheel. So get alongside the Farm Forestry Association or good forestry consultants, and you might have to pay the consultants, but pick people's brains and try and avoid doing some of the mistakes they've done, and probably have a more pleasurable and profitable experience as a consequence. So of course there's the timber value from the trees, and as I've talked about, shelter values. In the background you might be able to hear we've got a bellbird talking away, and there's a lot of bird life in my hills now as a result of the trees, so much better biodiversity, which is fantastic. There's shade values as well, in terms of the trees on the edges are shading, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, some of the pastures, but certainly offers a lot more shelter protection to the stock, whether they're in the blocks or beside one. So there are quite a few intangible benefits to having forestry on your hill country farm. So in my nearly 30-year farming career, I've planted a lot of trees, probably 50,000. I've enjoyed the process. A lot of that was when I was younger and fitter, and I'm now reaping the benefits in terms of satisfaction, just being able to walk through these blocks and look at the trees growing. It is tremendously satisfying, and with some luck there will be a good little check at the end of the process.